Hello, today we're going to see the topic ecosystems and communities presented by me, Alberto Moctezuma. Well, first of all, we're going to talk about the climate. Well, there are two terms that are quite similar but at the same time quite different: weather and climate. Well, weather is the day-to-day conditions of Earth's atmosphere, while climate, on the other hand, refers to the average conditions over long periods. A region's climate is defined by year-after-year patterns of temperature and precipitation. Environmental conditions can vary over small distances, creating microclimates. We are not exactly as climates, but are in small areas. So what factors determine the global climate? Well, global climate is shaped by many factors including solar energy, trapped in the biosphere, latitude, and the transport of heat by winds and ocean currents. Well, the trap of heat is principally caused by the greenhouse effect. And what is this greenhouse effect? Well, there are some gases in the atmosphere which are carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor. And these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere allow solar radiation to enter the biosphere but slow down the loss of irradiated heat to space. So the heat is trapped in the air by these gases, and this is what we call the greenhouse effect. Heat transport in the biosphere, it is transported by winds and currents, and as winds and ocean currents interact to help produce climate patterns. The paths and winds and currents are the result of heating and cooling. Earth's rotation and geographic features are what make these winds and currents with transport all the heat in Earth. Well, we're going to talk now about niche and community interactions. Well, first of all, tolerance. Every species has its own range of tolerance, and tolerance is the ability to survive and reproduce under a range of environmental circumstances. A species' tolerance for environmental conditions then helps determine its address, or habitat, how we call it, which is the general place where an organism lives. Now we're going to talk about the niche. A niche describes not only what an organism does, but also how it interacts with biotic and abiotic factors in the environment. A niche is the range of physical and biological conditions in which a species lives and the way the species obtains and what it needs to survive and reproduce. And now we're going to talk about competition, which is another interaction between species. When organisms attempt to use the same limited ecological resource in the same place at the same time, competition occurs. Competition can occur both among members of the same species, known as intraspecific competition, and between members of different species, known as interspecific competition. Well, there's a principle called the competitive exclusion principle, and this principle states that no two species can occupy exactly the same niche in exactly the same habitat at exactly the same time. If two species attempt to occupy the same niche, one species will be better at competing for limited resources and will eventually exclude the other species. And well, by causing species to divide resources, competition helps determine the number and kinds of species in a community and the niche each species occupies. Well, other interactions between species are the predation. Well, the predation is an interaction which one animal, the predator, captures and feeds on another animal, the prey. And predators can affect the size of prey populations in a community and determine the places prey can live and feed. Other interaction of a species is herbivory. This is an interaction in which one animal, the herbivore, feeds on producers, such as plants. And while herbivores can affect both the size and distribution of plant populations in a community and determine the places that certain plants can survive and grow. Where there are some special species in the biosphere called the keystone species, and sometimes changes in the population of this single species called the keystone species can cause dramatic changes in the structure of communities. Any relationship in which two species live closely together is called symbiosis, which means living together. And biologists recognize three main classes of symbiotic relationships in nature. The mutualism, it's a relation where both organisms get benefit. The parasitism is a relationship where the parasite harms the other organism and the parasite does not get harmed. And the commensalism, with none of the species gets harmed or gets a benefit. Now we're going to talk about the succession. Well, there is one succession called the ecological succession, which is a series of more or less predictable changes that occur in a community over time. Ecosystems change over time, especially after disturbances, as some species die out and new species move in. Over the course of succession, the number of different species present typically increases. Succession that begins in an area with no remains of an older community is called the primary succession, and the first species to colonize barren areas are called the pioneer species. From this point, from the pioneer species is where the primary succession starts to occur. There's another succession called the secondary succession. Sometimes existing communities are not completely destroyed by disturbances. In the situations where disturbance affects the community without completely destroying it, well, this is called the secondary succession. Secondary succession proceeds faster than primary succession, in part because soil survives the disturbance, and as a result, new and surviving vegetation can regrow rapidly. Secondary succession in healthy ecosystems following natural disturbances often reproduces the original climax community, but ecosystems may or may not recover from extensive human-caused disturbances. This depends on the damage that the human-caused disturbance causes. Now we're going to talk about the biomes. Ecologists classify Earth's terrestrial ecosystems into at least 10 different groups of regional climate communities called biomes. Biomes are described in terms of phylotic factors like climate and soil type, and biotic factors like plant and animal life. Other biomes include tropical rainforest, tropical dry forest, tropical grasslands, savanna, shrubland, desert, temperate grassland, temperate woodland and shrubland, temperate forest, northwestern coniferous forest, boreal forest, taiga, and tundra. Some land areas do not fall nearly into one of the major biomes because they are not easily defined in terms of a typical community. These land areas are the mountain ranges and polar ice caps, which are not defined completely as biomes. And finally, we're going to talk about the aquatic ecosystems. Well, aquatic organisms are affected primarily by the water's depth, the temperature, the flow and amount of dissolved nutrients there in the water. Water depth is one of the main factors that influences aquatic life and is divided in various zones. The sunlight region near the surface in which photosynthesis can occur is known as the photic zone, and below the photic zone in the dark aphotic zone where photosynthesis cannot occur. Many aquatic organisms live on or in rocks and sediments on the bottoms of lakes, streams and oceans. These organisms are called the benthos and their habitat is the benthic zone. There are other aquatic ecosystems called freshwater ecosystems, and freshwater ecosystems can be divided into three main categories: rivers and streams, lakes and ponds, and freshwater wetlands. There's another ecosystem called estuary. An estuary is a special kind of wetland formed where a river meets the sea. Estuaries contain a mixture of freshwater and saltwater and are affected by the rise and fall of ocean tides. Estuaries serve as spawning of nursery grounds for many ecologically and commercially important fish and shellfish species, including bluefish, striped bass, shrimp, and crabs. Marine ecosystems, just as biomes, typically occupy certain latitudes and longitudes. Marine ecosystems may typically occupy specific areas within the ocean. Ecologists typically divide the ocean into zones based on depth and distance from shore. These are the intertidal zone, where organisms in the intertidal zone are submerged in seawater at high tide and exposed to air and sunlight at low tide. The coastal zone. The coastal zone oceans extend from low tide mark to the outer edge of the continental shelf. The open ocean, which begins at the edge of the continental shelf and extends outward, and is divided in the open ocean photic zone and the open ocean aphotic zone. Thank you for your attention.